In an ocean of multiple and really just countless social media metrics, it tends to be quite a tedious process having to know, understand, and basically master all the different social media metrics. So that's why I created my previous episode, which you should really check out, which is basically based on the most important social media metrics worth knowing. On this episode, I'll be delving deeper into the awareness stage, because the awareness stage is made up of countless metrics that fall under this specific stage. But again, to recap for guys who are basically listening to this podcast for the first time, let's recap on the awareness stage. So the awareness stage, which encompasses the awareness metrics, basically looks at metrics that show how aware of your content your current and potential audience is. So how aware? It's basically awareness. How aware your current and potential audience is of your social media content. And previously, again, I'll keep referring to my previous episode, which you must really go back to so that you understand this episode much more further. So previously I gave examples of different metrics that fall within the awareness stage of the funnel, or basically awareness metrics. And awareness metrics, the top three ones that I gave were basically post reach, post impression, social share of voice. But for the purpose of this episode, I'll be delving deeper into the metrics that fall within the awareness stage, basically metrics which are awareness metrics. And without further ado, I'll be taking you guys through the 14 most important, or rather the ones that I deem important, and that should fall under the awareness metrics. And what I'll be doing is to make you understand the difference among all these different metrics, so that you don't get confused when you have to report to your manager or the executive with regards to these metrics and what they represent and what they should expect. Okay, so I'll basically be taking you through, as mentioned, the differences amongst the 14 most popular social media awareness metrics. And just to glance over the list quickly, I'll be taking you through, post reach, potential reach, post impression, potential impression, brand mention, video views, social share of voice, engagement rate, where most people might argue that engagement rate falls under engagement metrics, stage, and so on and so forth. But, just bear with me, I'll elaborate further. And then we'll look at share of engagement, audience growth rate, share of audience sentiment, influence score, and my last one, which is very, very important, conversation rate. Not conversion rate, conversation, because this falls under the awareness stage. It's conversation. But by the time where I release my episode that's focused on conversion rate, you'll understand the difference between conversation and conversion. Because if you think of it, conversation links closely to share of voice, because conversation will look at when people converse about the brand, or rather when people are aware of your brand, they converse about your brand. What is the overall share of voice? Again, it also look at the overall sentiment of people in their conversation. But you know what? Let me not get too carried away. I think let's start off with the first one, post reach. Okay, so post reach basically represents the number of people who have seen a specific piece of your social media content since it went live. So post reach basically, when you go on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on Instagram, you post a post. and people see the post on their news feed, reach basically refers to the number of people who the post has reached. That's why it's called post reach, right? So the number of people whom the post has reached. So the post reach looks at that to say, okay, this amount of people have been reached by my content on social media. And even when you run sponsored ad or paid ads on social media, you can also have a view of the reach to say, okay, I've spent so much, these are the overall people who were reached by my post. And that gives you an overall idea of how many people are aware of your post or your content, which will help you report better on awareness. Okay, cool. So moving over to the second metric, potential reach. Not to be confused with the previous one. Well, previous one is post reach, and now we're looking at potential reach. And just a clear definition, so potential reach looks at an estimation of the number of people in your brand's target audience that could have, remember, it's potential, hence it could have potentially be reached. So let's say in an audience where you have a target audience of 10,000 people, and then your post reaches 6,000 people, for argument's sake. The potential reach is 10,000, the post reach is 6,000. So the potential reach will help you understand to say, my brand can go as far as 10,000, which is the potential, but my post reach only managed to reach 6,000. Whether it's organic or paid, it will give an overall idea. And I think if your objective or your brand objective or your business objective is based on brand awareness, having a clear view of the potential reach will make you try to even push further to reach the entire audience, depending on what your objective is and if what you want to reach the entire audience. But that will help you benchmark between your initial reach, which is the post reach, which is what I touched on previously, and also the potential reach, and help you report on that better. So when you go to report to your manager or the executive, you'll say, out of an audience of 10,000, given our budget, we managed to reach only 6,000, which is 60% of the audience. But if you can give me more budget, we can be able to reach the entire audience. Probably that will make the finance guys upset because they don't want to take out money, but it will give you much more reason, or rather much more leverage, because you know what your potential is and you know what you gunned for, and if you didn't reach it or if you reached it. Now we look at post impression. So impression and reach can be quite confusing for most people, and it is for most people. So impression track how many times that content appears on screen. So post reach looks at the number of people you had reached. Impression looks at the number of times people have seen it. So basically it can reach two people. Each person can see it 100 times, another one sees it 200 times. An impression would say it's 300, where else it only reached two people. And the funny thing with impression is that it's quite weird. It's actually it's quite funny because it also includes repeat views from the same person. But again, if it's information that you want to stress over and over and over again, both reach and impression are very important, because you must reach a lot of people, but those people must not see the content once, they must see it multiple times, because so that it's subliminally entrenched in their minds, so that next time they walk into a shop, it creates brand recall, brand recognition, and ideally it drives them to make a purchase. Same with reach. There's also potential impression, which basically looks at, or rather measures, the total number of impressions possible based on your brand's target audience. So what is the most idealistic or the most possible number of impressions that you can get from your audience? Just as with reach, the total number of audience that you could reach. And number 5, which I think this is quite popular and I think most people know about. So number 5 in the social media awareness metric is the brand mentions. So these basically are the overall number of mentions or references of your brand online. So the thing is that this even goes beyond, social media mentions or, tweets or hashtags or whatever. So these mentions include product or service reviews, blog posts, educational content, and news articles. So it looks at each and every time your brand has been mentioned online. And the thing is that with a brand monitoring tool, you can be able to pick up every time someone online mentions your brand or speaks about it, positively or negatively. And it means that when someone mentions your brand, it means that they are aware of it. That's why it's under the awareness stage. And it's very important to figure out whether the mention is a positive or negative one. But we'll get on that in future articles where I'll be touching on brand monitoring and how to monitor sentiment and stuff like that. But now let's quickly move over to the sixth social media awareness metrics, which is video views. And this is very, very popular. I don't know why I included it here, but it was really just worth mentioning. And this basically includes the number of views your video content gets on channels like Facebook, YouTube, Vimeo, Instagram, TikTok, because when people view your videos, it means ideally they'll be aware of your brand. That's why they fall under the awareness stage. Okay, and let me move to number 7. And trust me, we're basically halfway through the 14 social media awareness metrics. So we look at social media engagement rate, and I did mention previously that the engagement rate falls under awareness stage because for someone to be able to engage with your content means that they are aware of it. Then the engagement rate then provides a more accurate representation of your content performance by providing the rate at which people engage with your content. Instead of simply just looking at its absolute measures of social media engagement such as likes, shares, and comments, the rate then gives you to say so much people saw your content, this is the number of likes that you're getting. So the number of likes, shares, and comments compared to your followers, what is the rate? If you have 10,000 followers and the engagement rate is really coming from 1,000, or rather the engagement numbers or the measures, it's only coming from 1,000 people, what is the overall rate? And you need to make sure that your engagement rate is as high as possible. Quickly moving over to social share of voice, and I really like this awareness metric because basically the social share of voice looks at how many people are mentioning your brand on social media compared to your competitors. And just going back at mentions that I mentioned previously, that with a brand monitoring tool you'll be able to track and compare how, or rather what is your social media share of voice or your social share of voice. Are people talking more about your competitors than you? If that's the case, why? And what do you have to do, and what do you have to adjust within your brand so that people talk more about you? And again, with the stuff that they're talking about, is it positive stuff or negative stuff? Because you don't want to, if your competitor is in trouble and they are talking about them more than they are talking about you, you don't want them to talk, say bad things about you, obviously. But with the implementation of a brand monitoring tool, you'll be able to track, have your ear on the ground with regards to what are they saying, what is my share, what do I have to say, how do I capitalize on that? Okay. And then now quickly moving over to number 9, which is the share of engagement, easily relates to the social media engagement rate. And this specific metric basically measures how your brand's engagement metrics compare to your competitors. And again, my thing is that when people engage because they are aware, and you have to track, or rather assess out how people are engaging with you compared to your competitors. Because if they're engaging with your competitor more than they're engaging with you, it means that they are more aware of the competitor than they're aware of you, and you don't want that to happen. Guys, bear with me, we're on number 10 right now. So we're almost done going through the 14 different social media awareness metrics and their differences. Number 10, we're basically looking at audience growth rate. Your audience grows because they are aware of who you are, right? And we're focusing on awareness. So the audience growth rate basically measures the percentage at which your brand's following grows on social media. It's basically how fast your brand gains new followers. Because if people are not aware, they won't follow you, right? That's why the audience growth rate falls on the awareness stage. The more people are aware of you, the more they will follow you. And you need to be able to measure that growth rate so that you can report on it. Remember, you need to think like you, the executive thinks, you need to think like your manager thinks, because easily saying that we've gained 10,000 followers this year, or rather we've gained 10,000 followers this month than last month, and leaving it there, it doesn't mean anything. But if you say we've increased our audience growth rate by 100% as compared to last year, because it means that people are more aware of the work that we do, which increases our brand awareness. It makes more sense to business people, because you don't want to be preaching to the converted, which are marketers, because as marketers we understand what you're talking about, but we are not the decision makers. We are not the guys in the finance. We are not the guys who are going to sign off the funding or sign off the funds so that you reach more audience and basically contribute more to the business much more greatly. Okay, I think I've said a lot. Let me quickly jump on to number 11. So number 11 basically looks at share of audience. All right, so this matrix gives a rough percentage of people your brand will reach as compared to your competitor. Simple as that. I don't need to elaborate further. I think this is straightforward. Jumping over to number 12, we look at social media audience sentiment, and this is a very important one. So thinking of the mentions, so people are mentioning your brand, and so much percentage of the audience is mentioning your brand, but we need to understand the overall sentiment. So what are people saying about your brand, and social media audience sentiment basically looks at emotions behind your brand mentions to measure people's attitudes and feelings about your brand. It basically adds context to all the ad mentions, comments, shares, and tone of conversation, because your engagement might be increasing because people are commenting and sharing your posts, and your mentions might also be increasing because people are tagging you or retweeting the stuff that you've written, and so on and so forth. But with a brand monitoring tool, you'll be able to gauge the overall sentiment, because conversation might be increasing, your shares might be increasing, your comments might be increasing, the likes might be increasing, but only to find that what people are saying about your brand is negative stuff. That's why the social media audience sentiment is important. You need to be able to track that, gauge that, manage that. And with a brand monitoring tool, or rather a social media monitoring tool, you'll be able to keep an eye on that, or keep your ear on the ground on that, so that you can be able to gauge what people are saying, so that you can manage the situation better, so that your brain is not affected negatively. And now looking at the second last awareness metric, we look at the influence score. So this score basically shows how a person or a brand is influential compared to every other source on social media or its competitors. So people are mentioning you, there's positive or negative sentiment, but overall, what is your influence? With that, we can look at a lot of brands. You can look at Nando's on how it's controversial. It's very influential in terms of current affairs and politics and stuff like that. But you need to be able to gauge your influence in relation to your competitors and make a decision if whether the influence works together with what your brand represents. We can't all be the Nando's brand out there. You need to know what works well for your brand. And lastly, finally, the last one. Thank you very much, guys, for bearing with me going through all these 14 social media awareness metrics. And the last one is the conversation rate. Guys, I like this one. But you know what? I'll create a complete episode focused on conversation rates because conversations are very, very important on social media. In fact, this particular metrics was actually coined by Google's digital marketing evangelist. He goes by the name of Avinash Kaushik. Avinash basically explains the conversation rate as a ratio of comments per post to overall followers. Because tracking conversation rate will help you uncover how much of your followers are compelled to add their voice to the content that you post and basically give you a view of how many of them are aware of your brand's post on social media. And guys, thank you very much for listening through this episode. And just to basically wrap up, let's just recap. So we basically looked at the differences amongst the 14 most popular social media metrics, which are post reach, potential reach, post impression, potential impression, brand mention, video views, social share of voice, engagement rate, share of engagement, audience growth rate, share of audience sentiment, influence score, and one we recently just reviewed, the conversation rate. So thank you very much for taking the time to listen through this episode. If you find my content valuable, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to my YouTube and podcast to be notified every time I post new content. Cheers.